open your copy of God's Word to Ephesians chapter 4. If you brought a Bible, you got a smartphone, Bible app on it, go to Ephesians chapter 4. There's also some message notes in that bulletin. And we're in a series called Respectable Sins, and we're pressing into some of those subtle sins that we've come to tolerate in our own lives. And so, very practical series this summer. And so I want to encourage you to take some notes on those message notes, especially if you struggle with the topic that we're going to talk about today, and that is the sin of anger. So a couple years ago, there was a news story about a 27-year-old Minnesota man named Justin Bowden, and he pled guilty to a charge of fifth-degree assault for losing his temper violently with another person. Now, the irony about the whole news story was he was on his way to an anger management class when he committed the crime. So he was at a bus stop, according to the charge, and he started to harass a 59-year-old woman. And witnesses say that he started to yell at her for what he perceived to be a general lack of respect. And so she pulls out her phone and begins to call the police, and he punches her in the face. And then another 63-year-old man who's on the scene, he tries to stop Bowden from doing this. So Bowden takes his blue anger management notebook, conks the guy over his head, and then flees the scene. And then police caught up with Bowden because they had pages of his anger management notebook. And so I'd say Mr. Bowden has an anger management issue, wouldn't you? So as we talk about anger today, some of you are thinking, well, I don't struggle with that kind of anger. I mean, my anger doesn't get violent like that. I mean, sure, I get a bit frustrated at times. That's a nice code word for anger. I get a bit snippy, at home or with my kids. All right, if I'm really honest with you, I do fantasize about going all Mad Max on the car in front of me during my morning commute, but I don't really struggle with that kind of like fifth-degree assault kind of anger. And so a lot of us think we don't really struggle with it, that anger's not a challenge in our lives. But let's do this. Let's walk through a typical day in a typical person's life, and let's see how many times that anger monster rears its ugly head. So maybe your life looks something like this. At some point has looked something like this. You get up, it's way too early. You're trying to get the kids breakfast. You're trying to get them dressed. You're trying to get them in the car so they can go where they're supposed to be going. They're not moving quite as fast as you need them to move. And so your temperature rises a little bit and words come out that you wish you could take back, but you can't. So you get them all in the minivan or the Suburban or whatever your urban assault vehicle is, and you put them in there and you drop them off wherever they need to go. You're already running late, but you decide that you need to go through the drive-thru in the Starbucks line. And the line is crazy, and you finally you're like one car before there, and I swear that idiot in front of me, I think he ordered like 18 triple venti, foo-foo, mocha frappuccino, or some sissy drink like that, and the barista keeps leaning out of the thing and handing him drinks. Is he done yet? No, he's not done, and more drinks. And like, seriously, why is this taking so long? And finally you get up there and you get your drink and you peel out of there and you enter into Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome commute experience, and you get to work and you kind of plop your stuff down, you sit down in your chair, you try to take a deep breath. I know this has never happened to anybody, but then you log in and you've been waiting for that email, like did the sale go through? And you open up that email and guess what? The sale didn't go through, and man, I'm not going to get the commission now, and I've already spent the money on my summer vacation. Enter a couple of choice explicatives here, and this is going to be a great day. And so you make it through the day, another Mad Max commute, you get home, you're tired, your spouse is tired, the kids are tired. And isn't that dinner and that bedtime routine, isn't that so much fun? And then finally everybody's to bed and you lay your weary head on that pillow and you just at least thank Jesus. Jesus, just thank you that I just didn't kill anybody today. And that's become the standard for a good day. If you're anything like me, there's plenty of opportunities throughout our day for that anger monster to rear its ugly head. And you're like, no, I lost my cool a couple times. It's okay, who's counting? I mean, this is one of the reasons that we're doing a series like this Respectable Sins series. And here's why. Because as followers of Jesus, as Christians, we have this tendency to look at what we think are the biggie sins out there in the culture and other people's lives, all the while we refuse to confront the respectable, subtle sins that we've come to tolerate in our own lives, sins like anger. They've become so commonplace. They've become so much a fabric of the way that we respond to people that we've failed to see them as sin, or they're really not that big a deal. That's the attitude that we have. So we're pressing into this series, and we're looking into a whole host of these respectable, subtle sins. Hear me, not so that we can be the sin police, but so that we can become more like Jesus. We're on this quest of holiness. We're on this quest of our heart and our character and our outlook and our response being transformed to look and to love more like Jesus. So as we talk about a very common, respectable, subtle sin, this thing called anger, here's what we're going to do. And if you look down at your message notes, there's 3 themes that we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to start with understanding anger. We're going to take a look at what the Bible has to say about anger. Then we're going to talk about unpacking anger. What's behind that emotion of anger that many of us experience? And then we're going to get practical, and we're going to talk about uprooting anger. How do we take control of that anger before it takes control of us? So that first theme, let's start there. Let's talk about understanding anger. Now, if I was to give you a definition of anger, and I think it's important because a lot of times when we talk about emotions like anger, they can seem a little esoteric, and how do I define anger? So I'd encourage you to write this down. Anger is this. Anger is a strong feeling of displeasure or antagonism that's often accompanied by sinful emotions, words, or hurtful actions towards another person. If you wanted a concise, or maybe not so concise, definition of anger, we could say that anger is this. It's a strong feeling of displeasure, even antagonism, that is often accompanied by sinful emotions, the things that we feel as a response to that, sinful words, sinful, hurtful actions that are directed toward another person. So there tends to be 2 different ways that anger is expressed, externally or internally. You've heard it said that some of you are stuffers and some of you are blowers. Right? The blowers are the people who vent their anger externally. Something happens that angers them, and there's that explosive outburst. It's directed externally. You say something, you want to hurt somebody. Sometimes it even turns into physical aggression. Sometimes it even turns physically violent. That's the external expression. But just as insidious is internal anger. That anger that becomes the slow burn, the pressure cooker that begins to breed that resentment and that bitterness and the fantasy of malice within our hearts. And so anger can be expressed externally, but just as insidious and just as destructive is when that anger is directed internally and we just do that slow burn. And sometimes, as good Christians, here's what we do. We try to justify our anger by calling it righteous anger. Now, the Bible does have a category of righteous anger, but we need to understand this, that righteous anger, listen to what it's limited to, because there's a lot of limits on righteous anger. Righteous anger is limited to an accurate perception of true evil that violates God's moral will. That's a lot of caveats that should clue us into most of the time our anger is not a righteous anger. Because again, a righteous anger, it is limited to an accurate perception of a true evil that violates God's moral law. So you might be thinking, well, this person did this to me. They said this to me. It violated God's moral law. I would just give pastoral intuition, just a pastoral hunch, that your response of anger is not a righteous anger that is really that much concerned about violating God's moral law. I would say that your response is more a result of the negative impact that person has had on your life and your emotions in that moment. So that's a first clue that you're not so much concerned about God and His will, you're more concerned about your emotions, so it takes it out of the category of righteous anger. So most of the time when the Bible is dealing with human anger, it's dealing with what we would call sinful anger, that strong feeling of displeasure and antagonism that is often accompanied by sin, sinful emotion, sinful words, sinful hurtful action towards another person. I think this is what the Apostle Paul is addressing in Ephesians chapter 4. Down in verses 26 and 27, Paul just gets practical about how do we live out the life of Jesus with each other. He spent the first 3 chapters In this letter to the church at Ephesus, talking about who Jesus is, what God has done for us by having our sin paid for, how we're new creations in Christ, how we're to be a new community of people with a different outlook. And he says, okay, what does it look like in chapter 4 and beyond to live this out? So here's one of the practical things he says. Verse 26, be angry and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not give the devil an opportunity. So Paul's looking back at the Old Testament. If you're reading your Bible and it's in all capital letters, it's an Old Testament quotation. Some translations of the Bible put it in quotes. He's going back to Psalm chapter 4, verse 4, which is a psalm written by King David. And King David is looking out around him and he is perceiving injustice in the world around. So King David is talking about righteous anger. But Paul takes that verse and he applies it. He says, I'm talking more about that sinful anger that causes sin. There's sinful emotions of what we say and what we feel and how we treat and we respond to other people. And he says this, don't let the sun go down on your anger. It's code for deal with it immediately. Now, so my parents have been married for 50 years. Every family is dysfunctional at some level. Even if your parents have been married 50 years and the family on the outside looks idyllic. Every family is dysfunctional. But one of the things that my parents did well, they modeled, and it was an expectation that we had in our home, was that we were not going to go to bed angry. And it didn't matter if it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and words had been said, and tempers had flared, and doors had been slammed, and all those kinds of things. My parents would say, we're going to deal with this. Right? If forgiveness needs to be extended, if conversations need to be had, apologies need to be accepted, we dealt with it. Because we said, we need to deal with this immediately, because next what Paul says is, do not give the devil an opportunity. That word opportunity is a super cool, it's a military word. It's literally the word foothold, stronghold. It's a tactical word of when you'll put a breach in a defense, and then all of a sudden there's a stronghold, there's a foothold that you can exploit to go into the rest of maybe the castle or the fort or the city. And he goes, whenever you let that anger fester, somebody said something to you, somebody's done something to you, and you don't deal with it immediately, it starts to fester in you, and you've given the enemy a foothold. And it starts to burn, and it starts to create all kinds of other sin patterns. He goes, deal with it immediately. Don't give the devil an opportunity. There's another guy who was a pastor in the early church, and he also said a couple things about anger. It's the half-brother of Jesus, a guy named James, and James writes this very practical letter, and in James chapter 1, verses 19 and 20, listen to this. This is one of those kind of verses that you want to memorize so that you have at the ready in those moments when you feel that your blood's boiling a little bit. He says, this you know, my beloved brethren. A lot of us don't know this, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and, say it with me, slow to anger. Now listen to verse 20. For those of you who might be thinking, most of my anger is a righteous anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. I mean, we could just say amen right now and go home and have lunch, right? That's a good prescription. Just shut up, be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, because your anger does not achieve what God is trying to do in you as he's trying to put the presence of his son and the character and the nature and the love and the grace and the hope of Jesus in your life. Your anger does not accomplish the righteousness of God. So if we're going to understand anger, again, that good definition, anger, it's that strong feeling of displeasure, even antagonism that gets accompanied by sinful emotions and words and hurtful actions towards another person. So let's talk about unpacking that anger, because it's one thing to look at a couple verses in the Bible and give you a good definition of anger, but let's unpack it. It's been said that anger is a secondary emotion. There's something behind anger. The anger that you're experiencing externally or internally, it's a symptom. There's something deeper behind that anger. And if we're going to unpack that anger, we need to understand, well, what's causing the symptom of anger? There's a lot of different things that we could talk about, but if we were to boil it down into three common things that underlie our anger, here's what I'd say. The first one is this. Here's where a lot of our anger begins. The genesis point is this. It's pride. It's pride. Our anger is the secondary emotion. It's the symptom. It's the presenting emotion. But behind that is an injury to our pride. Think about it like this, for those of you who are in the marketplace. You're leading a project, you've talked to one of your workmates, and they've promised to do something, and the due date for that project comes, and that workmate has either forgotten it or their work is shoddy and it's not up to the expectations for the project. And in that moment, you find out about they forgot or it's shoddy work, and you get visibly upset. Your team, the people around you, they see you getting visibly upset. Now, why are you getting angry? Now hear me, I'm not justifying the coworker's laziness. We'll talk about laziness next week, their forgetfulness. I'm not justifying their shoddy work, but the reason that you're getting angry is not their failure. The reason you're getting angry is that your pride has been injured. You've lost some face in front of your boss. You've lost some face with your team. And there's actually a biochemical process of shame that is very akin to anger. And so a lot of times when our pride gets injured, we lose face, we get flushed with shame, and it turns to anger. And so anger is the presenting symptom, but really what's going on behind the scene is that your pride has been injured. That's one of the most common things behind our anger. Second thing is this, it's control or a lack of control. So we see this in kids all the time, right? If you're a parent, grandparent, maybe you've babysat some kids, you see this kids all the time. They don't get to eat something that they want to eat. They don't get to do something that they want to do. They don't get to stay out as late as their friends get to stay out, and so they're not in control, so they get angry. And here's the newsflash, most adults don't grow out of this. I mean, think about it like this. Any of you gone on a vacation lately? Wow, you guys are boring people, or you're asleep or whatever. So think about a vacation. You're like, I didn't know I was supposed to raise my hand. I'm getting angry now. So think about a vacation. Now, I'm going to assume that you didn't go on a vacation by yourself. Some people like to vacation by themselves. It makes it a lot easier. But most of the time, you go with friends, you go with family members. And so, you have places on this vacation that you want to see. You have these specific places you want to go see. But when you go with a group of people, you have to do what? You have to compromise, right? And so what does that mean? That you're not necessarily going to get your way. And you spend way too long at that site that your kids or your wife wanted to go to. You spend way too long there, and you don't get to do the thing that you want to do. And I wanted to go snorkeling. We don't have time. Ran out of money. And then you don't get your way. And so you explosively outburst, or you just have a temper tantrum, and you do the internal passive-aggressive pouting thing, which is oh so attractive in adults, right? And so you don't get your way, and so you get angry. Well, what's behind the anger? The anger is the presenting symptom. What's behind it is the lack of control. You didn't get your way. Or think about this in marriage. Marriage gives you plenty of opportunities to realize that you are not in control. And if you think you are, it's just an illusion. It's just shimmering in control. So Wolfgang and I, as we were talking about this series this summer, knowing that I was going to be out and traveling some, we said, how do we want to divvy up the topics? And we had this honest conversation of, do we want to take the topics that we feel like we've mastered, or do we want to take the topics that we're still in process and still struggling with? I won't answer. I'll just let you figure it out over the series, how we did this. But marriage gives us so many opportunities to get angry. It gives us so many opportunities to have a lack of control, because I don't care how peaceful you are and how docile and gentle your personality says you are on the Myers-Briggs temperament indicator. Everybody likes control. Everybody likes to get their own way. And marriage is one of those places where continually you realize, I'm not going to get my own way. And what's especially infuriating, I'm not speaking from experience or anything, but what's especially infuriating is when you think that you can actually make the better decision about this, or you know more about this, but your spouse might be a little hard-headed in some of these areas, and so you're supposed to compromise, and you go back and you think, I think we should do it this way. No, I think we should do it this way. I'm tired of this. It's escalating right now. Fine, just have it your way. I'm going to get all passive-aggressive. Not speaking from experience or anything, but I realize, and I'm sure you've realized, that lack of control creates ample opportunities to get angry. Now here's a third one, a big one. It's mistreatment. It's when we've been mistreated by somebody. Maybe they've even gotten really angry at us. Maybe they've had one of those explosive outbursts, or maybe you know the person well enough to know that they're a stuffer, and they're going into that passive-aggressive thing, and their nostrils are flaring, but nothing's coming out, so you can read their body language, right? They're getting angry, and have you ever noticed how anger is contagious? How quickly things escalate. And so you're like, I can't believe that person said that to me. Don't treat me like that lack of respect, and all of a sudden it's there. Game on, baby. And it's the mistreatment. And so the anger is the presenting emotion, but behind that is the mistreatment. Now, please hear me. I am in no way justifying the mistreatment that you are experiencing at the hands of another person. And some of you in here, you are actually victims, and I don't use that word lightly, victims of some deplorable mistreatment. But hear me say this with just all grace and pastoral compassion. You and you alone are responsible for your emotions. You and you alone are responsible for your response even to mistreatment. And so we go, well, I have a right to No, you don't. Even at the hands of mistreatment. So when you're experiencing that anger, unpack it. What's behind that? Is my pride being injured? Is it a lack of control? Am I experiencing mistreatment? And rarely, I can throw in one word just for good measure, rarely does the anger of a righteous man or woman achieve the righteousness of God. That's unpacking our anger. So understanding our anger, there's that long definition of anger. Unpack it, what's behind it. Let's get practical. Let's talk about uprooting anger. What do we do with this? How do we deal with that anger that is ever present in our lives or just right on the surface, ready to explode or ready to stuff in that slow burn? It's really interesting at the end of Ephesians chapter 4, after Paul has said all this practical stuff about living the life of Jesus in relationships with each other. He'll go on to talk about like work relationships. He'll go on talking about parenting relationships, and he'll go on to talk about marriage relationships. But he says this in verses 31 and 32. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving each other just as God in Christ also has forgiven you. He says, put it away. Get rid of it, that bitterness and that rage and that malice, whether it's explosive or whether it's the slow burn. He says, instead, as followers of Jesus, be kind to one another. Be tender-hearted with each other. I love that song that we sang, My Grace Alone. It says, a heart of stone. Tell me, when you start to get angry, do you not just feel your heart hardening up, that heart of stone? Be tender-hearted and live with the vantage point of forgiving even that person who's mistreated you, who's injured your pride, who's taken the illusion of control away from you. Forgive them in the same way that Christ has also forgiven you. So let's just get practical. Here's where I would really encourage you to take some notes and to write this down. And I would say spend some time rehearsing this, because when the bullets are flying in the angers, you're probably not like, oh no, where are my notes? Where are my notes from the message? Okay, what's number one? It's probably not gonna happen. So it might behoove you to take some notes here. First thing is this, if you wanna uproot that anger. First thing, see the warning signs. See the warning signs of anger. So years ago in a survey, over 2,000 US adults were surveyed, and it was found that 10% of those adults that were surveyed had a check engine light on that they had done nothing about. Check engine light on their dashboard. And when those 10% were surveyed, 50% said that it had been on there longer than 3 months, and they knew that there was an impending breakdown about to happen on their car. And they said, well, why? And they gave all kinds of different excuses. Some of them said, well, it didn't really seem like something was wrong with my car, so I just kind of ignored it. And some people actually put tape up over the check engine light. Some people said the check engine light made me anxious, and I just didn't have the time or the money to worry about it. So they didn't see the warning signs. Hear me, your body biochemically has a check engine light. Do you know that? There's actually biochemical things that are happening in your body, and your body is giving off all kinds of warning signs. So here's what happens when you get angry. So when you get angry, your body starts to physically stiffen up. You ever experienced that? You start to stiffen up, you start to tense up, because here's what's happening. Your body is getting in this fight or flight stance, and your brain is sending signals to your adrenal gland to dump in extra stress hormones. And that one of those is adrenaline. So adrenaline goes into your bloodstream and your heart rate goes up. You ever notice when you get angry and your heart rate starts pounding a little bit, your blood pressure goes up, your body starts heating up, you get a little hot under the collar. And what is actually happening in that moment is your cognitive ability to have an accurate perception of the situation is narrowing. And the angrier you get, the smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller the vantage point of actually what is going on, where your brain is not working correctly. Your cognitive ability to accurately assess the situation doesn't work, and so you get hot. I had these huge ears, right? And they turn really red. Most people can see them from like Sputnik and stuff like this when I get red. And so I think that's one of the reasons God gave me big ears, because it's like a warning sign. And so I get all red here and I get hot. I'm like, man, I'm getting hot in my heart rate. And then all of a sudden everything's tensing up. And so my voice starts to get raised a little bit. That's a warning sign. I mean, just think about the last time that you were angry. I know for some of you, you've never been angry. We'll talk about lying later in the series. But just think about that. Right, you're in a situation that gets a little tense and, oh man, my heart rate's going up a little bit, right? I'm getting a little warm here. I'm getting a little flushed. My blood pressure is going up. I mean, I'm getting red. The person can see that you're getting red and your voice starts to raise up. Those are warning signs. So what would it look like when you start to see the check engine light flash? Like, warning. Something's going to happen. Something sinful, some sinful emotion, some sinful words, some sinful, hurtful action is about to come out if I do not heed this warning sign. Because your body's got a check engine light. Now, when the check engine light comes on, how about this? It's the second thing if you want to uproot anger. It's this: wait a moment. That just means don't talk. Just close your mouth for a moment. Thomas Jefferson once said the sage advice. He says, if you're angry, count to 10. And if you're very angry, count to 100. Some of you need to practice going to 1,000, maybe even 1,000,000, right? The bottom line is in that moment when the warning light, the check engine light's coming on, and you feel you're getting a little bit warm, and you feel your heart rate going, and you feel that your skin's getting blotchy, and you feel that there's that tendency for your voice to get a little bit more intense than it normally is. Just wait a moment, and you don't have to speak. Take deep breaths. Count to 10, 100, a gazillion, whatever you need to not have sin enter into that moment. One of the verses that my mom used to quote to my brother and I when we were fighting wasn't very opportune times, but it has stuck, kind of. Proverbs 15:1, listen to this. Should say it, I can picture a little West Texas accent. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Isn't that true? I mean, a situation is escalating, right? And anger is contagious, and they're frustrated, and you're getting frustrated, and that anger starts to escalate. Have you ever noticed that with teenagers? Anybody have a teenager? Anybody have that? Anybody glad that they've launched their teenagers? Not physically, but like their teenagers. Tough crowd today. So here's the deal. I've talked about this before, and I won't go on too much of a rabbit trail, but like teenagers from 12 to either 22 or 24, depending on boy or girl, literally their brains don't work correctly. I'm not being derogatory. This is scientific, factually proven stuff. Their prefrontal cortex, that's the executive decisioning part of your brain, it literally starts to disassemble. And so what takes over is the central limbic system in the center of the brain. And the limbic system is responsible for all your emotions. So you're wondering why your teenage son or daughter is all so emotional and they can't. Have you lost your mind? They've actually lost their mind. And so they escalate emotionally, you escalate emotionally, and it's like your limbic system takes over, and their limbic system is controlling the world at this moment. Instead of going, okay, don't talk to me like that. No, just go, okay, everything's getting escalated. A gentle word right now, if I wait a moment, it would turn away wrath. But if I pipe in with this overly emotional statement right now, it's just going to stir up all that anger. Instead, wait a moment. Now, while you're waiting a moment, here's the third thing. Pray for love. Pray for love. In that moment, while you're counting to 10 or 100 or a gazillion, whatever you need, pray for love. Some of you are like, really? It's so trite and pastoral. But seriously, just think about it for a moment. When you're in that moment, and whether you feel the slow burn pressure cooker going, or man, some words are about to come out that I'm not going to be able to take back. What if in that moment, you're like, okay, I'm waiting a moment, I'm counting to 10, I'm counting to a gazillion. Jesus, right now, I need you, I'm asking you, and for some of us, myself included, I'm begging you, Jesus, right now, give me love. Because love is the last thing that I'm feeling right now. I'm hurt, my pride is injured, I don't have control, and I like to be in control. I've been mistreated, there's injustice going on here, and I'm angry right now. And Jesus, I'm waiting a moment, I'm slowing down, I'm breathing deeply, but I'm praying, give me love. Give me love right now, Jesus, for that other person. Give me love for that person the way that you love that person. Help me to see that person who's injured my pride or taken away my illusion of control or even mistreated me. Help me to see them the way that you love them right now. It changes everything. It changes that quick response of fight or flight in that moment. See, the Apostle Peter, who was one of the early followers of Jesus, if you read the Gospels, you quickly find out that Peter has his own anger issues. God does some things in his life and helps him deal with this over the long haul. And then towards the end of Peter's life, he writes this in 1 Peter 4:8. Listen to this. He says, above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. I love that. He's talking about living in community and relationships with people who anger you, who injure your pride, and who destroy your illusion of control, or who mistreat you. And he says, above all, keep fervent. That word in the Greek, fervent, means continually, without ceasing, constantly. And I know you're going to walk out of this room today, and some of you are going to get in a car and you're going to have an opportunity to get angry at something. Maybe because the people in front of you are not moving quite as quickly as you thought that they should move. Or Officer Dave out there is not directing traffic quite as quickly as you think, and I'm hungry right now, right? Above all, fervently love each other. And you notice how that love covers a multitude of sins? Love doesn't excuse the sin. It doesn't justify the sin. But when we choose to pray for love in that moment, it gives us a different vantage point. See the warning signs. Wait a moment. Pray for love. Now, fourth one is this. For some of you need to get some help. You need to get some help. And I put myself in this category. I mean, throughout my life, and I've talked about this before, one of my chief sins has been anger. There's anger, my grandparents and parents, and by God's great grace, he's done an amazing work. But, when I was in my 20s, I was just angry. And you combine anger issues with, I was an infantry officer in the Army that was, trained to hunt people and blow things up. That wasn't a winning combination for a great marriage. And so, all these anger things, and there was that violence. I never got physically violent with Paige, but I would put holes in walls. I've talked about this before, right? And I needed to get some help. And if you've got chronic anger issues, and by that I mean this, you look back at your relationships, and there's relationships that have been damaged and even destroyed because of your anger. You have some chronic anger things you got to deal with. If you look back and you say, I just get enraged in those moments, and it just goes from 0 to Mach 10 like that, and I can't control it. And all kinds of things get me upset, and I get home at night, and I've even prayed, I've done all that stuff you said, Pastor Jonathan, but man, I'm just so angry all the time. And I can't do anything about it, it just takes over. I would say with just compassion, you have an anger problem. There's chronic anger, and you need to get some help. Go see a Christian counselor. Go talk to somebody from our recovery and our support ministries. On that next steps card that's next to your message notes on the back side, there's a little block that says, I need some help. That is confidential. If God's doing some convicting work in you and you're like, I've got some chronic anger stuff that I need to deal with, check that block. Somebody will call you this week and set up a time to have a phone conversation for you to come in. We've got individual help. We've got small group experiences to help you unpack that anger, whether it's the external or whether it's the slow burn. Get some help. Now, the last thing is this, and this is the absolute most important thing on uprooting anger. You ready? It's this. Trust Jesus. Trust Jesus. That's the ultimate response to the ultimate issue of our anger is trusting Jesus. Because I would tell you this, pastorally, theologically, biblically, experientially, those uprooting or those unpacking angers, pride and control and mistreatment, behind every one of those is a lack of trust in Jesus. Every one of them. Think about pride. When your pride is injured, what's behind that? What's behind that is you've lost faith And so now you're experiencing shame. Now you're experiencing frustration and anger, and it vents at other people. Why? Because your pride was injured, because your identity was rooted in your performance. Your identity is rooted in what your boss thinks about you. Your identity, how you feel about yourself, is rooted in what your teammates and everybody else and your spouse and your kids and what everybody else thinks about you, because you don't trust Jesus that you are who he says you are, and your identity is rooted in him. So behind that pride is, Jesus, I don't trust you. I don't trust you with my identity, so I'm going to chase after all these other things. They're going to continue to let me down and infuriate me and anger me, but I don't trust you. You think about control, right? Behind that is a lack of trust in Jesus. Jesus, you're not doing things on my timetable. I don't feel like I'm in control right now, and so I'm going to grab onto the illusion of control, because Jesus, I don't trust that you're good. I don't trust that you're going to do anything about this situation. I don't trust that you have my back. So I'm going to grab onto control, and when it slips through my hands like sand, I'm going to get even more angry because I'm even more let down in that moment. It's a lack of trust in Jesus. What about mistreatment? Anybody ever been mistreated? Right, here's what we think. We go, we're experiencing this mistreatment, and some of you in this room, you've experienced, again, deep mistreatment, and you didn't see Jesus come through quickly enough. What about that vengeance is mine, saith the Lord kind of verses? God, when are you just going to lower the hammer on this jerk? Have you ever noticed with vengeance, you always want it for that person immediately, but never for yourself quite as quickly? You ever notice that? That's another message. But what's behind that is, Jesus, I don't trust you to be my advocate. So behind every one of these things is a lack of trust in Jesus. That's what we really have to press into in our lives. See, here's the deal. When you choose anger, and anger is a choice, don't be a victim in this. Anger is a choice. When you choose anger, what you're doing is you're saying, Jesus, I'm choosing not to see that person or even to see myself and my culpability through the lens of your love for me and for that other person. When you choose to be angry, you're saying to that other person, right? You're not worthy of the grace of God. I'm worthy, but you're not worthy of the grace of God. And we don't trust Jesus for who he fully is in that anger moment. So what about this? Trusting Jesus. Love covers a multitude of sins. I mean, just think about it. I love that we have a cross in here. We'll always have a cross in here. You want to know why? It's always the reminder that love covers a multitude of sins. So Jesus, who's done nothing wrong, who's God with skin on, he's the innocent sufferer, he goes to the cross. While being reviled, he didn't revile in return. While being threatened, he didn't threaten in return, but he entrusted his heart and his life to his Father who would do what was right. And he dies on a cross for my anger. He dies on a cross for your anger. And his love covered a multitude of your and my sins. That's why there's good news today, friends. That's why there's hope for those of you who struggle with chronic anger and relationships are just in the wake of what you've done. Jesus goes, there's hope. Put your trust in Jesus. So could you imagine just sometime this week, maybe it's even going to happen as you're getting in the car today, sometime this week, just going, all right, I'm going to check out the warning signs. I feel it. I feel it coming on. I feel it. Heart rate's going up, getting a little warm, voice is getting tight, clenching the steering wheel when I want to go Mad Max on the guy in front of me. I feel it coming on. I'm going to wait a moment. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to count to a gazillion. I'm going to pray for love in that moment. Some of you, I'm not walking out of here until I get some help on this because I'm tired of the destruction that my choices and the things that I say and I do, how it destroys people. But at the end of the day, Jesus, I need your help. I need to believe your gospel, your good news that you're big enough to help me through this. And friends, I'll just tell you in my own life, there's a chronic struggle with anger, and in God's great, amazing restorative grace, I'm so different than I was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. It's by God's great grace learning in those moments to choose love and to choose trust. And here's my prayer for you. Today and this week and for the rest of your life, that you would experience the freedom of life with Jesus as you choose love and you choose trust in those moments. Can I pray for you about that? God, I want to thank you that you are slow to anger. Because we as your kids, we do all kinds of things that warrant your displeasure and your righteous, perfectly righteous anger at us. But God, you are slow to anger and you are gracious. You don't excuse our sin. You don't gloss over it. You don't sweep it under the rug. God, through the person and work of your Son, Jesus, you dealt with it. And his death on a cross in our place, dying the death that we should have died for our sin and our rebellion, it has covered our sin. It has taken care of it. And God, would we view not only you, but would we view the people in the world around us, in our family, in our relationships, especially those that can infuriate us? God, would we view them with how much you love them? In those moments, Lord, when those warning signs are going off, would your Spirit give us the courage and the discipline just to wait a moment and to pray for love? Lord, I especially want to pray for my friends in here that as they hear about chronic anger, they realize that that's them. And Lord, I pray that your Spirit would comfort them, give them courage to do something today about it, to take that step, to not leave this place in the wake of destruction of their anger. God, give them freedom and give them hope through Jesus. And Lord, at the end of the day, that we would be people who live our lives trusting Jesus, that he is good and he is on our side and he is present and we can trust him. We pray all of this in the name of the one whose life has covered our sin, Jesus Christ. And all of God's people said, amen. Amen.